to the city. So we're really excited for Mike to tell us more about him, his organization, and how that relates to our mission. Mike, take it away. Please introduce yourself and let's talk about parks.
Got to get all these disclaimers off my screen. I'm borrowing a room I usually don't work in today, so if I'm a little bit unfamiliar, my apologies. My name is Mike Hahm. I am in my 13th year as the director of the city's Parks and Rec department. I think like 22 years now running as a senior executive within our parks team. So I'm, as our kids would say, I'm an old head as it comes to the city building and the parks business, but I appreciate the invitation. I can talk about some background, or we can just get right to it.
Why don't we, well, if there's anything you had specific you want to talk about, or we can get right to it. I mean, I think, it is, I think sort of one of the main reasons we are interested in talking to you, we've got a number of specific questions, but how do you see the St. Paul Parks role in terms of the city's sort of goals for things like equity and sustainability? What role does your department play in those sort of overarching goals that the city has and that our organization supports?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think I'll start with sustainability, which I translate. I'll go right to the environmental aspect of the sustainability, which a lot of people do. It's on, if you take out the mayor's administration policy staff, it's like environment should fit under parks on the org chart. I mean, that the majority of the things that are either values, mission driven goals, if it's not in our wheelhouse, it should be like 1 degree of separation away. So we're in the process of updating our 5-year strategic plan. Right now, it's kind of a revolving process that we go through every year. It's maybe more of an action plan than a strategic plan, but environment sustainability is all over in major categories, almost every initiative that we play out there. Just quickly, I think it's a great time to be in this work. The year before I started, or I think the very election, the 2008 election when President Obama was elected, the city of St. Paul passed, or the state of Minnesota passed the Heritage and Legacy Amendment, which dedicates sales tax. We're about halfway through it. I think we have about 10 more years to go to invest in water, environment, habitat, and parks and trails. So it's, I think, part of what I've had the privilege of working with community to enact is been the beneficiary of a lot of new resources that are available, at least in those categories. I know there's other things that touch sustainability, but there's a lot of sustainability that's covered by that funding source and its importance. I think for equity, the hallmark for Parks and Recreation for equity is our services that touch people, mainly out of our rec centers, and then our physical plant. I think we've done, I'm proud of what we've accomplished. Can always do more, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished as a community the last handful of years or more, dating back to the Coleman administration and certainly through Mayor Carter's administration, to make sure that our investments in public infrastructure are spread throughout the city. We're not just responding to the people with the loudest voices, which doesn't always equate to where the highest need is. And then for applied equity, a big focus on our recreation programs, mainly working with kids. And I think how that ties together with the sustainability piece, our statewide work the work we're doing with Metro Parks agencies, the DNR, our state partners, is we're cultivating our next generation of park stewards, especially in communities of color. Minneapolis and St. Paul have access to the future park users that the entire state wants and that we're going to depend on with our young people and our demographics. So we bear a big weight and responsibility for giving exposure to these issues and, quality public spaces and quality programs. You're muted, Elizabeth.
Go on. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mike, I interrupted you.
No, I'm good.
So are there specific programs like with respect to sustainability or equity that you're particularly proud of that you're working on?
I mean, it's such a broad field. I mean, on equity, St. Paul has kind of led the way within the region and the state on using the legacy dollars that I spoke about to do outreach with volunteer coordinators and with doing environmental outreach with that work. And we're doing really specific work with BIPOC Outdoors that's connecting families and young people that have no, either feel intimidated in our outdoor settings or have no experience in those settings to outdoor experiences, whether it's overnight camping in town or something as simple as holding a fishing rod. And it's like, I think it's very critical work. And we're doing things that our agency and others were afraid that was out of bounds even 5 years ago, to say we are targeting this program at these communities and being very bold about it and very upfront about it. Not everybody responds the same way when they see that, and we take a little bit of heat, but it's been nice to see friends and allies kind of rising up and defending our program, so we don't need to. That's so I'm grateful for that. On sustainability, I mean, there's big and boring stuff. We have a new partnership with the Port Authority to complete the city's ash removal and replacement program, which is a huge deal, whether people agree with every aspect of how we've approached EAB in St. Paul and what Minneapolis did. I think most people agree that reforestation is essential for any response plan. And over the next 3 years, our community is going to see a lot of activity and transformation there, which includes reforestation. And I think that's in terms of big and boring, but essential. I'd put that at the top of the list. I guess we all in our day and age can define sustainability however we want. I think the completion, I wasn't too jazzed about it when Chris Coleman asked us to take on the completion of the Grand Rounds 8 years ago now, I think, because it just seemed like it would never happen. I mean, too many segments, too much time. But we're pretty much damn straight done with that now. So that's I think that's a really big deal, that once we get those couple segments done and then get some meaningful connections through Phelan and Como Park, that's going to be a really big deal. I'm incredibly proud of it and how that was executed. And it, as we as we get into some things that will be equally or more provocative, like getting into Summit Avenue, I think we can point to what we did and people can say we like this or we didn't like it. And we can have a discussion about it based on something we've actually did in our community versus things that are happening in other places. Couple samplings.
Yeah. Well, I saw a lot of heads nodding around. I have to say, I personally love everything that's been done so far with the grand rounds, and big thank you to it. We had a couple pre-questions, and then I see Luke and others are already putting some questions in the chat. So I'm going to go to the pre-questions. One of the questions popped up, and I'm kind of curious about this myself, is do city-owned golf courses make money?
It's they don't lose money. They're all breaking even right now. They're all fully capitalized, and so they're doing well that way. A couple things for this group to chat about. I can use Como Golf Course as a kind of a case study. The first, I'll use a technical term. Golf courses are built on crap land, the private and the public ones. Como Golf Course was Lake Cozy Lake. Highland Golf Course was a swamp that now has miles of drain tile through it. Phelan Golf Course is also a swamp, so there's reason they're golf courses. And it wasn't because we should dedicate 100 acres of land next to Como and Phelan Lake or in Highland Park for this activity. It was at the time unusable land for other things. The second thing is to convert those properties for anything else. They basically break even as golf courses. The Highland course had its best year ever. It's going to return money this year, best year since when I was running it in 1998. But they did 42,000 rounds there at the 18, I think over 26 at the 9. So it's going to return net revenue. The other two courses we don't self-operate. Those always return a net investment to us. Anything else we do there, we'd have to develop and we'd have to operate. When I sit on the board of directors at Como Friends, and they invariably once a year or when they do their 5-year planning, it's like, wouldn't it be great to develop the Como Golf Course as zoo habitat? And it's like you're talking about financially, and it's like we can have a discussion as a community what we want, but financially, the golf course is the most efficient property we have in the system. It pays for itself, including employee benefits. The zoo is the most expensive acre of park property in probably the entire state of Minnesota. So it's like, you expand that, it could be really cool and we could do a great job, but it's going to cost a lot of money. We are talking about the highest and best use at Highland 9. That extra 9-hole course there, we would never, we built that in the 70s. Bob Piram built a nice little parkland golf course there. Would never do that now. It's not a highest and best use with the levels of play and the demographics of our city. But we're looking at what a future of that could be. I think some of the numbers we've had some of the capital numbers to reprogram in a meaningful way that property, whether it's undulation, groundwater issues, et cetera, gets up in like the $20 million range really quick to do something different with that property. So it's without a significant partner with the state or someone else, it's good that we have the plan and ready to go. It's hard to imagine a circumstance where we're going to prioritize that investment over the grand rounds as an example. But we're doing the work. We're putting it out there for communities so that information is available. I am more than happy to talk about, the other thing about golf, I think that's really important. Golf is our winter golf is also our winter recreation center. So the county's doing something great out at Battle Creek, but a little bit closer to the center of the city, the golf courses are where we can cross-country ski and do less formal winter activities, sledding and those kind of things. And it's our golf courses are not shuttered when they're not golfed on. They're, cross-country running. If there's probably something place else that could happen, but I think the skiing in a place that's open is more service critical than the golf would be, almost, in terms of how we dedicate that land.
Good point. And as a skier, I appreciate that. Another question that has popped up is, we've got, obviously it's best park system, and somebody just mentioned it in the chat. It's amazing. And I think we all love heading out to Como Park, but has there been any thought given to, for example, at somewhere like Como, like charging for parking to both increase revenues, but also to encourage people to walk and drive there? Has there been, Minneapolis has really moved to a pay parking model, which is good and bad. And we're obviously not Minneapolis, but, has St. Paul thought about that? What would be the pros and cons of doing something like that?
Yeah, it's, I got a couple things. If I can, I only have one screen in front of me that I could pop into the chat. I don't have the Como parking study. Actually, they did it. It's probably on the Como Friends or our own city website. You can look at it, but we did some serious analytics there about how it would, the Zoo and Conservatory is a $20 million business. So it's 14 acres, $20 million a year. 65% is generated from earned revenue, 35% from taxpayer revenue. So it's a big show. So we studied what people would do to park. We also studied what that would do to revenues at different funding levels if people came into park. And the analysis, which is very credible, it's on the whole, you could, like any analysis, I could pick anything apart and say, I don't really believe this. I believe this a little bit more. On the whole, it was a pretty critical analysis that said, for 10 years, it would probably, I think it was 10, it might've been 5, but there would be like a really significant curve between a drop of visitation and a drop of what people would invest money in for other things of overall revenues to Como. So short term, it would cost, we'd have to be prepared to invest to test that out. We also, when we looked at it, had pretty significant blowback from our biggest partners out there, the nonprofit that supports it, the local community, and some of the legislative investors that support our capital program. So all not reasons why not to do it, but in a thoughtful way, we need to make some more friends, and we would probably need to have to cash flow operating losses to implement something that would have some further gains. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. It's but I think it's relevant. I live within 2 blocks of Como Park right now. The first 30 years of my life, or 20 years of my life, I grew up 2 blocks from Como Park on the Roseville side. And the middle years of my life, I grew up 2 blocks from the park over by the State Fairgrounds side. So I understand the service and the community pretty well. It's been really impactful during COVID to see the unprogrammed utilization of the park going up, but the visitorship to the Zoo and Conservatory, because we had to put caps on it, go down. And we're also not running the shuttle right now. So it'll be an interesting reboot when we can, if and when we can go back to no visitor counts, no reservations. Let's blast the doors open and pack 20,000 people in there, what it looks like. But we've had 2 operating seasons off from normal operation at the Como franchise.
Well, thank you for that. We've got a couple questions in the chat. One question is from Luke, and it's, he has the, perception that some parks are relatively underutilized. Um, and is there data on which parks and rec centers are the most heavily used and which are the least used? And if so, sort of, are there plans to try and shift that, or is it, talk about that a little bit about utilization? What do we know, and does that change?
Yeah, I do have, we have real data on the regional parks that we do surveying. Regional parks are Como Phelan, Mississippi River Boulevard, Harriet Island, Indian Mountains. The county has data on Battle Creek that extrapolates out and forecasts use. So I can pop that into the chat if at some point I get shorter winded, and I can toggle between screens. We have also good data on our fee-based programs, swimming pools, the golf courses, which our use is up. We're kind of at the top end of where capacity is for those things. And we have decent data for the rec centers. The problem with the rec centers is we're only capturing programs people register for. We're not capturing drop-in activities. I would suggest that system-wide our use is up for drop-in activities and anecdotal stuff. People want to be outside. People are using these sites. It looks and feels a little different than it does previously. If I use Como Park, which is right outside my window, you're going to see steady, sustainable use all day long because more people are home and accessing the park. You're going to see less organized activities because we and other organizations took a break from athletics, and the large picnics, we actually had no picnics, pretty much no picnics last year. Resumed picnics last year, but the client base and how people are using picnic permits is a little bit different than it was in previous years. So it's like it shifts around, but for individual use, we're seeing that up. We're seeing it up across the state. In terms of where it's happening, I don't think it should be any surprise, certainly to this group, that people gravitate toward quality. Even very little kids are mobile, and their parents are mobile, that they are, unless it's right across the street from them, if they're making a choice to go someplace, they will go the extra 10 blocks to go to the better play area. They will go the extra half a mile to go to the better rec center. They will go the extra half a mile to go to the better ball field or facilities. But the Frogtown Community Center, the field at Sylvan Recreation on essentially Maryland and Jackson. The newer quality stuff, we put up the new tot lot at Midway Peace Park. Those things are getting they are getting used, but we do have data. I think that what the data would show, most people would look at the data and say the good stuff's getting used, the stuff that's tired is not getting used.
One of the other questions that kind of came up in the chat, and I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it, but was a question about funding and sort of what's the split between taxpayer funding and grant funding. And we're assuming you're part of the capital improvement, or that your budget includes capital improvement, but are there any sort of, big pieces of that coming up, or how much of it is maintenance versus operations? So talk about your funding and kind of what are the chunks that it goes into?
I'll see if I can also, and if not, I can get it to you after, Elizabeth. Our budget doc has pretty good basic information on what we get and where we spend it. As a whole, you can figure our budget is 50-50, 50 taxpayer funded, 50 earned revenue. the majority of the earned revenue is essentially coming from the participant. If we get a commission at Como or somebody puts money in the donation box, that's money from the participant. If somebody signs their kid up for a childcare program, that's money from a participant. So it's like figure big numbers, $60 million. Overall, 30% of it's taxpayer money from the city's general fund or pass through from the Met Council for regional. 30% is earned revenue of some kind. I'd say grants, operating grants, depending on, I count the Met Council and the state's money as taxpayer money. I don't count it as a grant. I mean, it may show up as a grant, but it's the charts tell the story there. Our department's budget slide has a specific thing we've been tracking for deferred maintenance and maintenance. That's more on the, I'm gonna ask a question and pin you down a little bit. When we talk about maintenance, we're talking about operating maintenance, which is what we do to pick up glass or pick up trash and litter, make sure the paths are plowed, that kind of stuff. There's cap maintenance, which is, repainting stuff. If a swing breaks, fixing it, that kind of stuff. And then there's cap replacement, which is when something wears out, we're gonna rip it out of the ground and put something new in. When you're talking about maintenance, what are you primarily asking about?
Liz, you went off mute and then you muted again.
Oh, sorry.
Just before you started talking.
Sorry, I'll be honest. I think the question, I was paraphrasing somebody else, so I'm not quite sure what they were getting at. Because I think, it does tie into another question though, because somebody else asked the question about what is your protocol for trail maintenance? And you just mentioned, like glass, broken glass on city trails. How does your department deal with that, and how do we report it? If we find maintenance problems, whether it be glass or, down trees or what on your trails?
I think we do a pretty good job for the commercial on the front end. Anytime you're reporting something in a park, the biggest limitation we have is work orders and complaints, or service requests and work orders work best with addresses, and parks don't have good addresses. So if you're reporting something, and I run in this I do this myself. I take a lot of pictures and send it in because the picture paints 1,000 words when I do it myself. But it's like, if I'm on the Sam Morgan Trail or the Grand Rounds, it's like, I'm close to Arcade and or I'm on Wheelock at Arcade. I mean, that could be, that pins it down to 1/8 of a mile, where it's a picture helps, but we're really limited. The more information you can give us about location, the better we're going to do, first of all. The best way to report something is to just email the park's customer service email, because that gets it into the work order system, and the email itself creates a record. While we're getting better on phone calls, or if you text me, I'm forwarding a text. Eventually somebody has to transcribe what we're doing verbally and put it in a record and get it out to a crew. So I tell this to the Mayor Carter's staff and the city council offices. The best way, unless something's on fire and we need to put it out right now, is to send that email, because it creates the record and you get to use your own words. So I think that's the best way. We have, in general, for maintenance, we have maintenance routes, and our routes vary greatly from peak season to off season. in a typical summer, forget about our youth jobs program, which is 1,000 people. In a typical summer, we bring on 200 or 200 people other than the 200 people we bring on for swimming to work in the parks. So it's like, it's a lot. And we're on the lower end of our wages are on the lower end of the wage scale now. They didn't used to be. So we're struggling with this. So if you see a problem, it's probably a problem. In the summer, we're the highest staff. Right now, we have the lowest staff we have. So it's like, if you see something, please report it. If we don't get to it, be hard on us, but understand that it will require a little bit of patience, because until it snows, our staff are laid off, right? So we're kind of up here, then we go way down, then we come up a little bit once we're in the winter. And that's just our, the realities of our staffing model. But this is the time of the year when we're most vulnerable, because we're compressing. We're going from peak trash cans down to minimal trash cans. We're putting people out on routes to do on routes that they may not be familiar with. And so it's we do appreciate the reminders. I still, even though I'm perfect and I'm the best, we're number 2 in the country, I got stats to prove it. I get defensive when people say stuff looks bad. My staff get defensive once in a while when they see the emails about stuff, but it's like, we need the prompt and we need the help, but email.
Excellent. Another question, I'm going to combine 2 comments that were in the chat. There's a lot of folks in our group that love things like biking, and there's a comment about the bike plan, which I believe is actually under the jurisdiction of Public Works, not the Park Department. But is there overlap, for things like biking between Park and Rec and Public Works? Like, are there any places where you have control over the bike lanes, or do you have how much input do you have into the bike plan? Sort of what's your overlap there? Are there joint jurisdictions? Does that question make sense? But what's the interaction between those 2 departments?
For the big stuff first, I think we have a big voice in the bike plan. I mean, because the recreational component and the intersection is ours, right? We're responsible for it in the charter. Our staff work hand in glove on projects all the time. I think I don't know what these circumstances are. I can probably think of an example if I'm tested, but we have park staff that maintain Public Works sidewalks and trails. There's Public Works staff that maintain parks, sidewalks, and trails, because the routes work better for people that are in the areas. So it's like, we can always improve that stuff, but there is general good government there, just like you would do with your neighbors. It's like, hey, you're down there, can you do an extra 30 seconds of work so I don't have to come 400 feet across property to do it. We're doing that kind of stuff. For the major infrastructure, the thing that your park staff owns is what's in the regional trail system. And that's what we are eligible to get regional money from the state of Minnesota through the Met Council. So that's why it's a big deal when we get the grand rounds into that regional park plan, that we get funding partners and maintenance partners for that. The Point Douglas project is another example of that. The Pyram Trail was a big, that we opened this year, was part of that. Working on Sam Morgan is a part of that. So it's for major infrastructure, something to sit down with Ruben Collins and Alice Messer, people that are experts at this, rather than have good knowledge but not expert knowledge like me, is like, what are the realities, like for big stuff people talk about, like the Greenway connection, like I think the Greenway connection would end up being a regional trail with regional partners after it's built. People ask about the CP rail spur that goes from the Highland Bridge site, kind of between 7th Street and Shepherd Road at that point toward the downtown. That corridor is never going to be a regional corridor because the Sam Morgan Trail is less than a half a mile away. So it's, if we ask the Met Council to put that in the parks plan, it's never going to be in the park. I'm telling you, never going to be in the parks plan because there's no reason for it. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be great, but it's like, we gotta work to fit that someplace else. So, I think those are some things of figuring out where they fit, where you can best advocate for, not just within City Hall, but with our federal and state partners. I think those are two great examples where, one, you're barking up the wrong tree. If you go one direction, you might find a better path to implementation if you go someplace else. So it's like, Ruben and Alice and our Public Works and Park staff talk about that all the time. Right now, the other area where we have the most interface is on the parkways. Again, I should probably know this at this point, but it's complicated. Who pays for stuff? In general, Public Works maintains stuff that's within the right of way. We don't, but Lexington's a parkway, MRB's a parkway, Summit Avenue is a parkway. And right now we're doing that Summit master plan. So that's something we're working really deliberately with each other. So we're not, Public Works won't come in and do something before we can get that master plan done for Summit, which is a really big deal. Edgecombe Road's a parkway. Highland Parkway is a parkway. There's a nice little map someplace about all those things where if people want to drive a truck that's too heavy, they have to write me a note and I have to give them permission to temporarily drive a truck on the parkway.
Nice. Good to
Get
know.
to flex a little bit.
You know, something that you mentioned, it ties into, I think, a question we had posed, in our agenda was, you talk about, advocating for a little bit for trails. If, help us help you. What's the best way to see, to advocate for more park access? And I'm going to put trail access as well for our residents. Is this going to our city council members, going to our legislators, Congress people? What's the best way to try and push for? We want to be number one, not just number two.
Yeah, well, thank you for what you do. First of all, I appreciate it. Even though you didn't ask my opinion, I'm going to start with what we should be advocating for first, because I'm advocating for it and I'm right about everything. So I have to be right about this. Is the trails we build should last for 70 years. It's stupid asphalt, right? And right now we are not, like the Director Kershaw has with the streets. They're doing a little bit better job than we are. We're not taking care of our new infrastructure. So with no crack filling, with no seal coating, the Grand Round Trail will last 30 years, then it will fall apart. And probably the last 15 years of its service life, it'll be junk and it will be unusable. So I think when I spoke to the city council for my budget hearing, it's like, I feel the thing that I've done the worst job at, and we do the worst job as a community, is taking care of our stuff. Because it's, financially, it's malfeasance to have an asset that if you take care of it would last 70 years. And if you don't take care of it, you have to replace it in 35 years. The trails we just replaced in Como Park that run between the lake and Hamlin. I don't know if anybody rode that. They're really nice now. Those were built in the 80s when I was working for Bob Piram. Or actually the 90s when I was working for Bob Piram. They're 30 years old, were never maintained other than filling potholes. So in the last 20 years, they were junk. Or the last 10 years, they were junk. So it's like, that's what I would advocate for first. If we can't take care of our stuff, why are we building more? Unless it's super critical, why are we building anything? Especially the critical regional infrastructure. We got to take care of it. I encourage all groups, our Parks Conservancy, who would be a partner, the Como Friends, who's a very sophisticated partner, that focus is important, that for groups like you, even for a trusted or someone who is an ally to you and wants your opinion like me, that if we do three things good and we're working on three things and then a fourth and fifth thing comes up that we can't get to reasonably, it feels like I'm being waterboarded by my friends. And I don't, it's fine. We can continue to apply pressure, but our staff are, and I'm a human being, my staff are human beings too. And after a while, it's like, we're doing all this stuff and we're getting, our friends are pounding us. So it's like focus on what the priorities are, encourage some other stuff, but can't put the metal down on something that's not going to happen while we're doing something else. And it's like, it's fun I love cutting the ribbon on the Pyram Trail today or this year. But it's like, let's take care of our stuff. I don't want to replace the Sam Morgan Trail that we built 10 years ago when I started this job in 15 years. I mean, it will be a total bummer. But I will end where I started. Regardless of what path you choose, I appreciate the advocacy, because whether we agree on any given 5 seconds or not, it's like awareness is important. And people need to know what's out there. Policymakers need to know what's out there if they're going to respond to it. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. All right. So one more question, then let's kind of start wrapping things up. But actually, I was discussing this question with a client today as well, and not specifically for St. Paul, but is there money that's going to be coming from the most recent federal infrastructure bill that will help connect our parks, grow our parks, etc.? I mean, I know that there's some trail connection funding in there. Is any of that going to be coming to St. Paul? Will we be able to build better with, I guess it's the BIF that just passed. We're still waiting for BBB.
And the short answer, hopefully, obviously, is yes, there's stuff coming. And it's like when the city's stated priority is like when the 3rd Street Bridge gets rebuilt and Kellogg gets rebuilt by the XL Arena. I mean, that's going to help all this stuff, right? So it's like, short answer, yes. It's like, I think it's too early to say what some of the big things would be that might be infrastructure related. We have a couple active grants for the North End Community Center and the River Learning Center, which I think are important. I think they're more tangential to this discussion than direct. From my standpoint, the kind of the holy grail of projects that's unfunded right now, and it's a great project, but a grossly expensive project, is what now is a $20 million bridge that would connect the Bruce Vento to the Sam Morgan. So through the nature sanctuary there. and it's, I get sticker shock even saying that out loud, but eventually we do need to make that connection as a community. So on the lists and what's out there, we keep throwing that project out there. That bridge won't, I mean, that a $20 million bike ped bridge is not going to be built with local funds. I mean, that there needs to be an assembly of partnership funds occur to have that happen. But those are some things that are out there. But there's a lot of discussion. Thanks, Luke, for popping that up. There's a lot of stuff out there, and it's I talked about the heritage and legacy. When we go into, as a department, our 5-year planning, it's like we just elected a mayor. Melvin Carter is going to be mayor for the next 4 years, right? That's a known leadership dynamic, which is really good. I think that we will, we're going to elect a governor next year. I think Governor Walz looks pretty good right now. And we have state and federal partnerships for the first time since the Clinton administration, really. So it's like, it's a good time to be focused and advocating and implementing these things on the long arc. I haven't seen it for 20 years. So it's like, there is timing. It's not going to redo everything. There is competition, but we haven't had federal partners since Clinton. That's in a meaningful way. And we have it now. And we could be in a pattern where we have it for 2 to 4 or 6 more years with local leaders that are stable in their roles, which is, I mean, I think that's some serious magic beans there if you want to advance some of the stuff that you talk about from time to time.
Oops, sorry. Thanks, Mike. You know what I'm going to do? We really appreciate your time. We don't want to take too much of it. I did see one quick question. I'm going to throw you in the chat, and you can give a quick answer on this, or maybe it's a longer term answer. But Dolores wants to know if there's money in the budget to have a park sign made for Tilden Park on Aurora and Albany. It's a pretty specific question. So if you need to get back to us, let me know. But that's an important question. What about a park sign for Alden or Tilden?
Well, if it's a sign, we can do a sign, but I probably need to figure out what exactly that is and what it looks like. But there's no budget for that stuff. That even a project that simple requires, we usually wait until there's an improvement. Like
you don't care about your package on the deck, right?
No. I care about all packages on decks, especially around the holidays.
We'll assume that wasn't aimed at you, Mike.
Yeah. It's, this is something that occurred over time. It's I probably have the Parks Department under my leadership and the folks that work for you probably have $100,000 that they have available to do ad hoc improvements over the course of a year. The rest is tied to an improvement project. Like we just did Hamlin Park on Hamlin and essentially Thomas. So that allows us to go in there and upgrade the lighting and redo signage and do some things to make the entire playground look good, not just the play area. So for a nice little park like Tilden, which is a former school site, we probably won't get in there until we do something to update the entire site. But I'll have to give a peek and see what's there. If it's one of the old wood signs, we might be able to put a wood board up. If it's one of the new signs, that costs a little bit more dough. That's that maintenance dilemma you highlighted earlier.
Okay, great. Well, thank you on that. And Mike, I appreciate we've taken almost an hour of your time. We really appreciate it. I think as you can tell from the questions, the parks and trails are very important to our members and a very important part of St. Paul, it sounds like there's no sign. We'll have the lawyers maybe follow up. But thank you. So everybody, big round of applause for Mike.
Yep.
And we hope to be engaging with you in the future. So thank you. You're obviously welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but you don't have to. So and say hi.
I'll pass on that, but I have two quick questions, yes or no, and then an offer. Do
Okay.
you want the link to the Metro Park stuff?
That would be great.
Okay, I will send that. The other link I had was for well, I'll provide both links I have for you.
Great.
The other thing I would encourage, and whether you take me up on focus or not, we're doing our 5-year plan, which is more of the boring checkbox thing to track things. We published that. It'll be published in February through our Parks and Rec Commission. So if you don't see it, I encourage you to take a look at it and like cherry pick, read it and go. And you can read through 20 pages in 5 seconds and go, we care about these 4 things, or we really care about this one thing that's not listed. If that type of feedback for us is super helpful. If you come back and say there's 400 things that we really want to see that are not in here, you can provide us that information. It's not terribly helpful, but to make sure there's alignment with what we could major partner for, that document is gold to my team. So look for that in fact.